The idea of doing teacher observations in the first place is to help teachers basically have another set of eyes in the room and ears.
Social science collage.
So that somebody else can be absorbing some of the things that teachers do that they may not be aware of for themselves, and then use that information to sort of absorb into their teaching style. Can inform many different things: content, style, classroom management, all of those kinds of things.
How it is that you can capture what I'm saying.
The particular protocol that we used, or that I used in Mr. Griff's class, was one where you sit in the back of the class, the observer sits in the back of the class and basically writes down everything that happens. So it's not about analyzing or making a judgment, it's about just absolutely noticing as much as you can. So everything from how many students are in the room, where are they sitting, what kinds of interactions are happening with the students, what are you seeing the teacher do, what's the body language, all of those kinds of things are things that you can just write down from the beginning to the end of the class, and then have a conversation with the teacher at the end of that, where they have a chance to look at that and be able to sort of see that teaching day from another perspective.
Is everybody clear? Everybody have that?
This was very early in the cycle, so this is one of the first actual classes that was being taught, which is important because that's the stage where a lot of the emphasis has to be on kind of setting the tone for the cycle in the classroom.
Do you understand what you are expected to do and know at the end of this class?
It's a first period class, so that's always interesting because you sort of see the kids coming in various stages. There were a couple in the front row, a couple in the back row, and everybody else kind of in the middle. And the first thing that Mr. Griffith did when he walked in was to tell everybody to move up. He said, fill the seats in front of you, move up, move up. It's a very effective way to immediately put a different dynamic in the classroom.
I see no notebooks out, okay? The first thing you do when the bell rings is to come into class, take your notebooks out.
Next thing he did was he observed that not everybody had their notebooks out yet, and so that was the next thing was, and notebooks and pens should be out immediately when you sit down. I should not have to tell you that. And then immediately from there, he just kept it moving very quickly.
Okay, so at the conclusion of this lesson, students will be able to.
So the next thing was to put up the learning objectives. By doing that, he's setting up the expectations for himself, what he's going to be able to cover that day, and also is telling the students what they're covering that day and what they're going to be expected to be tuning into. He does the thing of reinforcing the learning objectives by having students repeat them back to him.
What was the second one?
Finding out the ways of knowing social science.
Mm-hmm.
So he's immediately engaging students in a way that is what you would call low risk. It's not a big scary like I have to think of this concept question. It's a kind of what did we just say? So there's a already kind of a almost call and response rhythm that is set up of students have small successes immediately. Plus, he's establishing that through this, the protocol in the classroom is you raise your hand when you want to share something.
Collecting the data, Marcus said, and then Jonathan said, analyze the data.
And one of the things that is his job on that first day is that he's getting students' names. Knowing the names of the students, individually is it's such a small thing, but it's one of the most important things that you can do to start to manage your classroom.
I need to know your name, sweetie. What's your name? Crystal? Crystal, what is the definition of geography?
So many of our students are coming out of schools where their teachers can have them for an entire year and still not know who they are. So if you're not even identified as a human being, as a person, an individual in the classroom, you're immediately disengaged. So part of what I saw Mr. Griffith doing in my observation was reinforcing learning the kids' names. So when he knew the names, he would use them, and if he didn't know the names, he'd say, remind me what your name is. There was a moment also where he did call a student by a wrong name, and immediately he went and dealt with the next opportunity he had to call on that child. He went over and he reinforced his actual name. He called him by his right name.
Anthony, that's your name, right? Anthony, right?
So that was a great acknowledgement of not trying to I don't know, wiggle out of it or something, but to just acknowledge that, no, I got your name right this time, you know, and I know who you are now.
The branch of social sciences that studies production, consumption, goods and services, and distribution of wealth.
That's another great strength of Mr. Griffiths, is that he
consumption.
goes from this language, the language of the social sciences, this kind of academic language, you know, talking about anthropology and sociology and geography and all these things, to very colloquial language.
Some people spend their money on Louis Vuitton. Some people spend their money on knockoff Louis Vuittons. Yeah, I know where to get them $25 Air Force Ones, don't you?
Immediately when he goes into kind of his colloquial way of talking with the kids, like they start to laugh and they start to relax a little and they start to, and plus they've got all these comebacks for him, you know. So he can juggle that kind of thing, because then when the kids kind of like, oh yeah, I get this, you know, he can then bring it back to the academic language and refocus on that.
In order to draw a conclusion, you've got to pay attention to what you're reading, but the step before drawing a conclusion, you're collecting the data, and then you do something, and then you... Yes, brilliant. Analyze the data.
There were a couple of students in Mr. Griff's first period that we looked at that were returning students that were of particular interest for that idea of setting the tone for the new year and kind of the classroom management thing.
Or someone's economic needs, Janae, could call.
So I would describe Janae as a student who, she can be incredibly charming, incredibly funny, and she is also a student who has a history of some issues with teachers, and she can go kind of from 0 to 60 really fast in terms of temper or losing her cool and that kind of thing. But Janae that day, initially in the class was fine and pretty focused, but you can start to watch, especially when we reviewed the tape, where you sort of see Janae going from this pretty focused, pretty, you know, on point kind of place to slowly starting to kind of almost unravel. You can see like the foot starts going, she's restless in her chair, she starts, you know, and at one point it becomes really clear that Janae is about to blow. You know, that it's like, you can see it coming and you just know she's got to get up in a minute. So
does anybody,
So she leaves to go to the bathroom. Mr. Griffith lets her go to the bathroom, and you know, she's gone. The class continues. About almost 10 minutes later, I think it was about 7 minutes, something like that, Mr. Griffith suddenly, just absolutely no word to the students, nothing. He just abruptly walks out of the room. The perspective from the classroom was that, you know, a couple minutes later, he walked back in the room, and then a minute later on his trail was Janae, and she was sitting back down in her seat. What we heard on the tape later was that he had walked over to the bathroom and said something like, Janae, you better get out of that bathroom now.
Janae, I suggest you get out of the bathroom. I know you are. That's why I came and got you.
But it was kind of this perfect, you know, you see him juggling this child who he knows he's got to give her some leeway. He's got to let her be her, a bit of it, you know. So he can do a lot of that with Janae through humor.
Listen to what I'm saying. Can I finish my question? I thank you.
Through letting her speak, you know, to certain things that she for sure knows. And so that calms her down, you know. So you see him kind of playing this line of trying to allow, no, he knows he has to allow Janae to be Janae, first of all to get the best out of her, but second of all to not have her head explode in the middle of class, but keeping her kind of also controlled enough or cool enough that she can function in the classroom and that the classroom can function, because Janae is one of those kids that can take a whole class with her.
What impact does the fact that there are more check cashing places, Jonathan, open your notebook, Because this is a question that you're going to have to know. You might see it on the test.
Jonathan, his kind of persona that he puts out there is that he's kind of always disgusted with the world, which of course is really bad for a classroom dynamic, because if one kid is kind of doing the head wiggle and, you know, doing the teeth sucking and everything, that is really contagious in the class.
Is to observe.
The day before in class, Jonathan and Mr. Griffith had a big kind of head-to-head blowout. Jonathan was, you know, throwing some attitude out, and Mr. Griffith actually ended up ejecting him from the class. It was going to be interesting to see then how Jonathan coming back into the class the next day, how was Jonathan going to handle it and how was Mr. Griffith going to handle it.
Why young people join gangs.
Mr. Griffith, he was not focusing on Jonathan in any particular way. And Jonathan was just kind of trying to do the under the radar, I'm just going to sit here and do my work thing, which is fine. But it didn't mean that he was really re-engaged into the class. Probably what was going through Jonathan's head was, what's Mr. Griffith thinking about? And Mr. Griffith might have been, you know, feeling sort of like, oh, how am I going to get Jonathan back engaged in a way that makes sense? And so he ends up doing that by, you know, he starts to throw out some questions and he's pushing the kids on something, and there's a question that's difficult that he's trying to get them to connect something to, and Jonathan finally pushes out an answer, and Mr. Griffith just pounces on it.
Yes, 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 brilliant. Analyze the data.
And then later, Jonathan makes a suggestion about a way that they could maybe do an assignment, or he asks if this was part of the assignment, and Mr. Griffith pulls that thread then.
That's what I was asking you for. We had to make a consumption scale.
Oh. Whoa. What is that? That's very interesting. A consumption scale.
And you see on camera this moment where Mr. Griffith, you know, he has his back to the class again, and he says, yes, let's do that as an assignment. And Jonathan in that moment, you know, does this very exaggerated no kind of thing in the background for the benefit of the students, right? So you can sort of see him saying, you know, like, oh, no, no, let's not do that. But then if you watch carefully his body language, you can see in that moment that he's kind of glowing from like this, you know, yeah, I really nailed that one. This is, you know, this is something that's good. You know, so he's back fully, not just fully engaged, but also really invested in the class in a different way, where he knows he's now made this concrete kind of contribution.
How would you illustrate where you stand in terms of wealth in the society, Marcus?
Put a picture of Applebee's.
Applebee's, why Applebee's?
Because it's mad expensive to eat there.
Ah.
If you eating there, you got bread.
Oh, so the choices that you make, right, illustrate where you are in the economic continuum.
Some of Mr. Griffith's real strengths as a teacher, first of all, he's an incredibly dynamic teacher. He's very animated. Literally, he'll move around the room a lot. There is a focus point at the front of the room because that's where kind of notes are being put down and all of that. But he is constantly moving around the room, looking over students' shoulders, direct eye contact with specific students, you know, really connecting in different ways. He has an ability to kind of see and hear everything that's going on in a room. And there were even moments in my observation of him where I thought, oh, I think he's missing that or this, you know, a student putting a head down for a minute or something like that. And he wasn't, because he would just kind of seamlessly go and correct behavior.
I want you to sit up all the way. Move your hand. Right. Beautiful, beautiful. That's why your back hurt now. Slouching.
He learns his students very quickly. So he knows the students that he can, you know, correct behavior through humor. He knows the students that he has to kind of like put his foot down over. He knows the students he has to whisper in their ear and do it privately. He knows the students that need to actually be taken out of the room and talked to. He has a really intuitive sense about that kind of thing. And that's something that, I mean, that's a strength, that's sort of a natural strength for Mr. Griffith, but it's also something that teachers can really learn, I think, by mostly through being really open to, you know, learning who their students are and knowing who their students are.
You didn't have your hand up all day. Lord, yes.
When you cash a check, check at a cash out place, they take some money.
Ah, when you cash your check at the check cashing place, it costs you money.